Good morning, Dr. Moreno. It's great to see you this morning. I'm here to discuss a little bit about psychodrama and my experience a couple weeks ago with a psychodrama class that I took with Professor Heidi Landis at Lesley University. And I've been told that you are the creator of psychodrama, so you'd have the answers for me. And I'm just really excited to be here with you today and to be able to discuss these things with someone who's so knowledgeable. Indeed, my friend, it is so great to see you today. Psychodrama is indeed a very powerful and therapeutic approach, and I'm so glad that you had the opportunity to learn more about it. It encourages an openness and a freedom that traditional talk therapy does not allow us to have. And I'd be happy to open up that light a little bit more for you today. Yes, Dr. Moreno, and in particular, I'm really interested in the concept of aesthetic distance. As someone who's not a drama therapy major, I was actually studying the expressive therapies. I did not get to talk about aesthetic distance as much since it's not really in my field of focus. So I'd love it if you could enlighten me a little bit more on the difference between drama therapy and psychodrama by ways of aesthetic distance. Absolutely. The concept of aesthetic distance in psychodrama in particular allows participants to connect deeply with their emotions and experiences, fostering a more profound exploration of their story and giving them some control over the narrative. Whereas in drama therapy, I'm sure you know, although it's not in your modality of choice, I'm sure you know that there is a little bit more metaphor utilized, and there are things that we don't say as directly in drama therapy. And the psychodrama is meant to bring about connection, social connection, and that is a lot more clear through personal story, and the protagonist gets to be in charge of what parts of their story are told, explored, traversed, or ignored. It's up to the protagonist how close or how far they want to get from their story. And then at the end, people can share their connections without getting too specific about the protagonist and their story. They can share how they connected to it in a more direct way with their experiences. So yes, while psychodrama has a little less aesthetic distance, there is some positivities to that. Thank you, Dr. Moreno. That really enlightens me. I guess I have a few more questions for you. Considering my reflections on the class that we had a couple weeks ago, I was also, as someone who has experienced trauma and was kind of putting myself out there to do what someone might call a trauma drama, I have a little bit more questions about the trauma-informed aspects of psychodrama. Something that Heidi taught us when we first arrived was to kind of have a grounding technique. So to have something that you return to when you're feeling a trauma arise or bubble inside of you. So I was really interested in the fact that this routine of maybe turning your ankles around or taking a deep breath and placing your hands on your knees, this was an anchor for us to come back and remember that our bodies needed that in that moment. So I just wonder if you can enlighten me a little bit more on the trauma response. Indeed, routine for trauma responses can be a powerful tool in helping the individual navigate and process their traumatic experience. By building familiarity and comfort with that emotional processing and having a physical thing to call back to ground themselves, it makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because psychodrama can be so heightening, it can be so powerful, it can be so overwhelming. It's important that we have a physical callback to what makes us feel safe. And I think that your professor was probably just trying to figure out the sociometry of the group, what the group needed in terms of healing. Something that I have talked about in my work a lot is healing the group as a whole. And I would love to continue that conversation with you, because I think that that's something that you mentioned earlier a little bit with the trauma and being someone that experiences trauma. It's important that we know what the group is ready for, what the group is asking for in terms of healing. And this is an important sociometric tool that I use in my work. Exactly, Dr. Moreno. I had a very enlightening and somewhat disappointing, but not disappointing, because I understand that sociometry is an important factor. It's part of the triadic system. So we begin with the warm-up, and we have the sociometry, and then we have the psychodrama, and then we have the group psychotherapy aspect. So it is important that we use sociometry, but I was confused as to why the group was not wanting to do a trauma drama. But I now understand that the group as a whole has to heal itself, and it seeks out what it needs. And I guess something that I found in my reading was that it was important to listen to what the group as a whole was seeking out, such as what the group is sociometrically leaning towards. So continuing on that line of thought about sociometry and what the group requires and the group as a whole, I would love to talk a little bit more about your history. So I know around 1915 in Vienna, when World War I was just beginning, so the era of fascism and nationalism and the Great Depression were all high, and you decided to group together and almost rally together some prostitutes and give them what they required: social aid, mutual aid, legal advice, protections, housing. And you were able to see patterns that arise amongst these prostitutes, and you were able to better see what they needed as a group, as a group of people who have a common factor in their work and what they choose to do in their employ. And I think it's just really interesting that this was kind of the beginning of group psychotherapy and of watching sociometric trends form. I would love to hear more about how this began, your approach to group psychotherapy, and I guess I'm so interested in that beginning story, that origin story. Oh yes, dear friend, those were good times a long, long time ago when I did that work, but it's still very valuable work to me. It was the beginning of everything, really, and I think something that work brought to light for, intellectuals and scientists and actors and, anyone in the field is that people want to belong. They want to be part of a group. They want to feel commonality. They want to feel united. And so through this work with the prostitutes in Vienna, I was able to recognize that groups have common desires and we're able to serve them better when we work as a group. So something that you mentioned was the beginning of group psychotherapy, and although I was the pioneer of it, of sociometry and psychodrama, we wanted to emphasize that these interrelationships and interactions amongst group members are what really began this work. We need to recognize that individual dynamics are not the only thing that can contribute to healing. And so these individual dynamics, while important in terms of when the protagonist is running their own psychodrama, it's also important that these individual dynamics relate to what the group needs for healing. This reminds me of my concept of mutual aid, and it's as if each member acts as a therapeutic agent for the other member. And this fosters healing through action and interaction and reciprocation within the group. The group's autonomous healing of each other can be tapped into through mutual aid and support among the members. And I learned that in Vienna, and I wanted to bring that back to the States. And although the theater of spontaneity was a little bit of a sidestep from that, my goal was always to find and connect people on commonalities. Thank you, Dr. Moreno. That was very, very detailed, and I really appreciate you telling me a little bit more about your time in Vienna and what it brought to the beginning of psychodrama and sociodrama and even, just the entire field. And I guess I have another question about, your vision for psychodrama, or your vision for the theater as healing. And I've heard that you really wanted the group to mimic society as a whole, and that in the group we can empower each group member by connecting them. So there's autonomous healing centers within each person, and by connecting them with other people, it gives a lot more potential for healing and support. And I think that that's something that we don't really get in traditional talk therapy, and it's something that we don't really talk about. So I really appreciate you telling me more about that. So next, I really wanted to get into one of the psychodramas that I was a witness for. I played the role of the witness during the class, and this person's name, their name is Ananya, or Silk, and they dubbed their psychodrama, they named it Jailbreak. And I guess I just really like to discuss a couple of the techniques. I have them written down here, and get some of your insights and figure out more about the function of the techniques and what they facilitated in the group and in Silk's psychodrama for themselves, and what Heidi, the director, did. So before we begin talking about Silk's psychodrama, I just wanted to mention one of my professor's favorite quotes of yours was, paraphrases of yours is, "There is no resistance, only a lack of warm-up." So I guess we'll start there with the warm-up, and something that Heidi always had us begin with to get us kind of into our bodies was movements and sounds that kind of related to where we were at in the moment. And then based off of those movements and sound, we would kind of analyze together as a group what we noticed, and that kind of is a bit of sociometry as well as warming up. So something we noticed in this warm-up was that a lot of the movements were into the circle. So we were starting to move towards each other instead of staying in our, regular spot. So when we were doing these movements and sounds, typically, let's say I'll do one right now, and that would be me staying on the spot. But in this particular warm-up, the trend that we found was people were moving into the circle and bringing their bodies and sounds into the circle, which kind of made us realize that maybe we're feeling a little bit closer to each other. Maybe we're offering each other something, or maybe we were just becoming more confident as a group and able to be more silly. But I really appreciated that we kind of did this warm-up that, doesn't seem like it really means much, but then it actually has a lot of information to provide us. So I'd really like to hear more about why you think this warm-up, is so important. So I think one of the reasons your professor probably utilized this warm-up was to kind of create safety within the group a little bit, but also to create connection. So when we do movements and sounds, although we may not believe that they have a lot of meaning when we do them, like your professor said, we can kind of analyze what these movements and sounds are pointing us towards. I guess I'd like to hear a little more about where this movement and sound led you, or what the director chose to do next. So Dr. Moreno, this is actually very interesting. I was kind of part of the leading into the warm-up, and I was sitting next to one of my cohorts, Josh, and he was wearing a beaded bracelet, and I was interested in it. I just had to my eyes were drawn to it, and other people's eyes started to be drawn to it. And he explained that it was from one of his students who, for when he's running, he wears it, and it says Josh fucking his last name, just to encourage him. And so Heidi noticed that we were kind of connecting on this bracelet, or our attention was focused on this bracelet, and I think she realized that something that we were all focused on in that moment could be utilized as part of the work. So then she said, can you imagine on this bracelet a word for the work that you want to do? And that kind of solidified the image for us, and kind of made us have to share with each other, turn and share with each other about the theme or the word that was on our bracelet. And I think she used this, bracelet as an anchor for us, because it was something that we were already interested in, and it's kind of something that has become another phenomenon with Taylor Swift and all of that. And I think she was trying to relate with us, and so I think this bracelet then led into the sociometric aspect of the beginning of this psychodrama. So we did our placing hands on the shoulders of people we believe could play roles in this piece of work, well, the theme that was on our bracelet. And we do this a lot, where we would pick by just placing our hand on the shoulder for someone that could play ourselves, or someone that could play our double, or someone that could play a different character. And I think this was her way of creating safety. Can you kind of can you kind of tell me a little more about that? Yes, my friend. It sounds like your professor was trying to get you to realize what roles may be present in this psychodrama for you or for your work, to kind of warm you up to seeing if you were ready to do this work. And the placing the shoulders on the hand, or placing the hands on the shoulders of people that could play your double or that could play you shows that we're building support of people who we think could be our support in that drama. And it also kind of shows where the risks are as well, with themes. So I think she was building that container by making you realize what might actually happen in the psychodrama, what might actually come to fruition in terms of character, in terms of story. So she was really just trying to get you to recognize where the patterns were going for yourself, really, where the work was going to head for you. And then as you looked around and you shared with each other about the placing hands on, I'm sure you did do that. I know you didn't say so, but I'm sure you shared with each other about the roles. It solidifies, it concretizes the work that you're going to do. Thank you, Dr. Moreno. That was really helpful. I think I'm still struggling with the terminology of concretizing and containers and aesthetic distance, and I really appreciate you enlightening me on those. So the next thing that happened in Silk Psychodrama was the protagonist pick. And this one was actually a little tough for me because I put myself out there to be chosen and I was not chosen, and that's fine. I think something that a lot of people brought up was the feeling of not being chosen and the feeling of not really feeling seen by the group. But as I said earlier, I was ready to do something with my trauma, and the group was not ready for that, and that's okay. We needed to figure out our identity first, which is why we chose Silk. We did our toe in, so we stood in a circle, and we all placed a toe into the circle. And on 3, we would step in or out of the circle if we felt ready to do our psychodrama. And I stepped in. And we had our eyes closed for this, which is good because then there's less judgment and less, someone's watching me. And so I really appreciated that. And then basically, once the protagonists were in the middle, our potential protagonists, we gave a line about what the theme of our drama was, and mine was about trauma, an event that I couldn't really remember in my life. And the sociometry decided what would most help them was helping Ananya find their hot self or find their identity and kind of discover who they are despite the negative voices. And honestly, now that I think about it, I really understand why the group needed to do that first before we started digging into traumas that made us question our identity. We need to understand our identity first before we start figuring out what made us question it, what covered that up for us. So I really am starting to understand that the sociometry decides. And I'm sure that that is something that you have said many a time. So then I wanted to get your advice on the walk and talk. So this is something that I haven't gotten to see in person before. So I have done psychodrama in my own therapy, but I've actually never seen a walk and talk before. So these walk and talks that we did over the course of the class were very interesting to me. And so we talked about, during the walk and talk, Heidi and Silk talked about the witness role and taking care of self during the psychodrama. They discussed a lot of themes that Silk had a lot going on for them. They had a few possible contracts that could have worked out, and I think Heidi wanted to stick as closely to what the group desired, and so they ended up with the contract of talking with Hot Self, having a conversation with Hot Self despite the negative voices. And although this was the contract, the psychodrama went in such a direction that, you know, so much more was achieved that I'm amazed that such a small sentence can bring on such awesome, you know, work. So, and also I wanted to mention that they had already decided that they kind of wanted to do an intrapsychic psychodrama since they had seen interpersonal psychodramas. So I guess I'd like to hear a little more about that from you. Of course. So the protagonist pick is a really important part of the sociometry, and you said it yourself that the contract that then gets decided in the walk and talk needs to fit what the group as a whole has kind of asked for, has kind of expected in their choosing of Silk. And so while Silk probably had a lot of ideas for their psychodrama, it was important to stick to what the group needed for their own healing. And like you were saying with identity, talking with your hot self or your most authentic self, despite the negative voices, sounds like probably the most salient and relative thing that you could have done for the group. Thank you, Doctor. So finally, I really want to get into the techniques that were utilized. There were so many. There was role training, there was role reversal, there was doubling, there was creating a sculpture. There was no use of the mirror position, but there was a lot of imagining and what is it called? Scene setting. There was a lot of scene setting. So I'd really like to discuss each of these techniques. Well, first let's talk about role training. So role training in this psychodrama was utilized to help Silk show Ren how to play their hot self. And so Silk and Ren reverse roles with each other in the end to kind of have Silk's hot self speak to current day Silk. So I'd love to know more about why you think this role training occurred. Well, my friend, I believe role training is utilized so that it becomes more clear to the protagonist what exactly they need from that person in that role. And it seems like in that place, Silk was trying to find out what the hot self means to them, and what the hot self would say to them. So through role training, Silk was able to put words to what the hot self would say, and then Ren, the person who was in the role of the hot self, would be able to embody that and facilitate healing and action, since Ren now understands what Silk's intention for that character or that role is. Thank you so much. The next technique that I wanted to talk about is doubling, and I actually have watched quite a few of your videos with Jana and Sue enacting doubling, and I think that it's a really powerful tool, and it's one that I got to be a double in a kind of a popcorn double sense. I was never given the position of a double, but in this psychodrama, there were opportunities to popcorn double Silk to say things to the negative voices that Silk had surrounding their hot self. So I guess I'd just like to know more about your thoughts on doubling. Well, my friend, a double is utilized to enhance mutual existence. The double comes from the great French novelist Guy de Maupassant, and he was struggling with a psychosis that I would like to call his uncontrollable double, a double that was in his mind, and he hallucinated himself in that own space, giving him words to say. And in the way we do that a little bit with the double in the therapeutic and theater space, when we're projecting the double onto the stage, it's so that you can learn and maintain and facilitate control over your own mind. And the double is supposed to portray the depths of your psyche. And that's why if the double says something that you don't agree with, you don't have to repeat it. It's supposed to align with the depths of your psyche and let out these intrapsychic experiences or thoughts that wouldn't only come to the surface by our own fruition. So the double brings up in us what we already know is true or untrue, and we get to decide through that technique and basically externalize the technique of talking to oneself on the stage, and we're able to see what the protagonist actually needs from themselves. Thank you so much, Dr. Moreno. That is a great explanation. Another technique that I saw utilized was the technique of scene setting. So when Silk was near the end of their drama, they created a scene of a mountain to kind of find peace for themselves. And I just wanted to know what you think about scene setting and why you think that was utilized in this psychodrama. Scene setting can help provide a mental anchor for the protagonist. A lot of the time, scene setting is utilized to concretize, as I said before, the situation or the story that is occurring in front of us. So the scene setting of the mountain was probably utilized so that Silk could imagine that peaceful and kind and soft and gentle place where they could be with their hot self. And we can't do anything if we can't imagine it first. So the role of scene setting, or the job of scene setting, is to spark imagination and give us an anchor, so that mountain could be something that Silk calls back on in the future. Like you said at the beginning, those trauma responses or those exercises that your professor was having you doing, that grounding technique that brings you back when something is overwhelming, that can be what scene setting does within the psychodrama. Okay. And finally, I really wanted to talk about role reversal. While this is a very largely used skill, it's something that, I understand it and I've practiced it. And I realize that role reversal is usually just the protagonist ending up telling themselves what they needed to hear in the first place. So I'd love to hear how you facilitate this magical and kind of shocking process, because in the end we all have the words that we need to give ourselves. So it's just really interesting to me that this technique can be utilized to kind of bring out what we already know. Now, role reversal is a hugely utilized skill, and there's not any amount of words that I can put together that could fully explain the power of role reversal. But the role reversal is utilized to organize what we know about each other, and what we know about each other, especially in an interpersonal drama. The role reversal is used to show our subjective knowledge about the other person, rather than just opinion and perception of the other person. We try to put ourselves in the shoes of the other person, and for an interpsychic drama, we try to put ourselves in the shoes of a thought or an entity or an idea. And while that can feel very floaty and ungrounded, it actually provides us with a lot of information, and it gives us a chance to encounter each other in a more subjective way. People who enact role reversal say that they can never accurately, fully 100% be the other person, but with considerable veracity and with considerable intention and considerable aesthetic work, then it's the truth of the knowledge that we already know that comes out in role reversal, and it can only be accessed through role reversal. Role reversal gives us an integrative pathway to finding out what we need from that other person. I hope that answers your question. Yes, doctor, it does. I just wonder, why is role reversal utilized so heavily in the psychodrama? It was one of the few techniques that I saw utilized over and over and over again. So I'm guessing it must be kind of like the basis for the psychodrama. Well, role reversal is an introduction into the drama for the auxiliary egos, and it's a way to present the other characters in the story by way of the protagonist, by way of the protagonist's perceptions, but it is presented in a subjective manner so that the witness can kind of relate to it as a whole, as a group, so that it's not so specific. But I do believe that the director utilizes the role reversal to keep the event here with us, to keep the people here with us during that moment. It kind of contains our intention and gives us an action that we can do to put ourselves. It's active empathy. It's active healing, especially with interpersonal dramas, but it can also be very powerful with interpsychic dramas. So finally, I wanted to discuss one of the choice points in Silk psychodrama. And in Silk psychodrama, Silk ended up appointing someone to play their 4-year-old self, because that was the last self that they could. They were asked what age the hot self actually is, and they said 4, because after age 4, the hot self had been injured, hurt, and the protagonist was really intent on sending that 4-year-old into the hot self to save it from the negative voices. But those negative voices were so loud and so terrifying that sending a 4-year-old in there just didn't seem like a good idea. It didn't seem like a safe idea. But through this, we learned that that was something that Silk was accustomed to, the 4-year-old self saving the adult self. But the director decided to employ the use of auxiliary egos, the use of Silk's strengths and good qualities to go get the hot self. And it was very powerful, and I think the director did that to preserve the safety of the 4-year-old girl, but also to remind Silk that that 4-year-old girl is not in charge of saving them anymore. And I thought that was a really interesting choice point, since the protagonist was pretty intent on sending that 4-year-old in. Well, I believe your director made a really good decision. Sometimes in the narrative we can have an intention that, if played out, it can actually be harmful and continue a pattern that was unhealthy in the first place. So your director made the choice to not send that 4-year-old in, so as if to break that pattern for the protagonist. And while it wasn't exactly what the protagonist desired, it gave the protagonist agency in a way. Although it seemed like the agency was being taken away, the agency was actually being facilitated so that the 4-year-olds would not get injured. The agency and the autonomy was facilitated by getting other parts of Silk's self. And I believe the director knew that that's what the group needed. The group probably related to the fact that their younger selves were in charge of saving their older selves. But the group needed a new story. The group needed a new narrative. And the group needed a new technique for healing. And that was not sending the 4-year-old in to protect them. It was finding strengths and using those that we already know, that Silk already knew, that Silk already had inside them, to save that 4-year-old little girl. Thank you so much, Dr. Moreno. That was really helpful. Something that was really powerful for me in this psychodrama was, although I was not picked or as the protagonist, it was a really important sharing process for me. A lot of the time we have this desire to say what we enjoyed or how powerful the protagonist was or how brave they were, but our director made it very clear that we should only communicate how we connected to the story and avoid talking about the protagonist and what the protagonist did. The important part was to show how we can relate and to show that what the group dynamic is, by showing how we all related to that story, and what each person identified with. So for me, I really identified with having negative voices around the authentic version of myself, and feeling like the most authentic version of myself is that 4-year-old, and wanting her to save me. So I really connected to that. And although I wanted to talk about how amazing Silk did and like the bravery that they had, it was really important for me to talk about what made sense for me and how it related to my life. And that was something that I really appreciated from the director, the sharing quality, where we weren't talking about our reaction, we were just talking about our relation. Now, Dr. Moreno, I only have a couple more questions for you. First, I want to talk about something that was mentioned a few times throughout the class that I honestly, as a woman of science, I've never really heard of this term, and I'm really interested by it, and I would love to know more because I read up about it, and I still don't really understand it. It's the concept of tele, which to me kind of seems like intuition, but I'd love to hear more about what you think tele is. Well, my dear friend, tele, of my own invention, is derived from the Greek word meaning far, or at a distance. And it's a profound connection between individuals that can transcend physical proximity. It's a connection that we have amongst other people, amongst other humans, that chains us together as a common soul. It's a deep sensitivity and resonance and empathy that we have with other people that make us gravitate towards each other. In my work, I've called this a socio-gravitational force that draws individuals into more meaningful work and relationship. Tele is this mental, physical, somatic draw towards other encounters, and not just rely on chance encounters. This tele guides us to other people to gain an insight into their lives. And it gives us a structure for the actual makeup of the other person. While tele is a sociometric idea, in a way it's spiritual. It combines the belief that there is something higher than us, there's something bigger than us that connects us all. And it is beneath the conscious awareness. Now, I'm not talking psychoanalytically, but there is a type of mental instinct we have to draw towards another person. And tele transcends conversation, communication, talk. It's mental. It's a mental connection. And I want to clarify that tele is actually different from transference. Sometimes people like to misinterpret me and believe that tele is transference, which is a one-dimensional projection of past experiences onto a person, which can eventually distort the relationship and make it toxic. But tele is about authenticity, genuineness, stability, and continuity amongst people and their interpersonal dynamic. It's not about projecting yourself onto someone else. It's about finding pieces of yourself and someone else in those sections where we can find each other and connect with each other and engage deeply with each other. Tele is the basis for knowing what the group needs to heal itself. And tele can also be something that provides a group cohesion, a group idea of what they want to do in the work. And finally, I want to say that tele is something that without it, it would be really hard to engage in role reversal within the group. Tele is a transcendent empathy that role reversal entails, really, because role reversal is about perception and subjectivity, and without tele, without that intuition, without that embodied attunement, we can't do role reversal. Thank you so much, Dr. Moreno. I am so honored to learn more about tele from you. I haven't had much experience with it, and I don't really know how to utilize it in my own practice, but I'm really grateful to learn more about it from you and hopefully watch it in action. My professor said that tele was in action when the sociodramatic pics were being made. Don't fuck with the sociometry, because the tele leads us to what the... Okay, Dr. Moreno, so finally I wanted to discuss with you one of the techniques that I'm going to utilize in my practice, because I just got a job as a creative arts therapist, and I really enjoy this technique because it's something that I feel can be really powerful. It's something that we used on one of the first days. It's called the empty chair, and although many people associate this with Gestalt, I knew it was had to be you. So the empty chair, for me, I got to speak to my friend who died by suicide. I got to speak to my mom. I got to speak to many people that I can imagine are in that empty chair. And the empty chair represents anything that we want it to be, and we can engage in dialogue with it and externalize those thoughts and feelings that we have onto the empty chair. And this increases our self-awareness and gives us some possible resolution, maybe. And I used this technique for my drama therapy intervention in class, where we had a group of elderly people speak to the big bad wolf in their life. So this was more of an idea than a person, because if we were being direct and calling it a person, that would be a little closer to a psychodrama, but this is a psychodramatic technique, so we needed a little bit of metaphor in there. But I really want to utilize this technique in my practice that's coming up, because I think although it's pretty simple, or it seems simple, it's actually very powerful. And I just would love to hear more about your thoughts on the empty chair technique and how I can use it. Indeed. Well, the empty chair is, it's simple, yes, but it shows us that we can unlock a deep creativity, a deep emotion, just by looking and imagining something, imagining someone in that chair. So I think it is a really important technique that we can use, because in my case, the empty chair serves as an auxiliary ego, and the protagonist can reverse roles with the empty chair, and it helps facilitate the surplus reality. We have this new reality where this person or this quality or this thing has come to life in this chair, and there's a part of inner reality that we'll never be able to access that without imagination and into the surplus reality. The surplus reality is a place of great invention and great imagination, and where we can allow the seeds of what could be true, what would be there, to germinate. And I think the empty chair provides us with well, like you said, you used a fairy tale. It's almost like bringing a fairy tale to life. I'm imagining an elderly person sitting across from a big bad wolf right now, and that's terrifying. But in reality, it's just an empty chair. So it gives us this opportunity to create something bigger than what our inner reality is, something more stable, something more concrete. And it gives us a chance to find resolution with that quality, person, thing, whatever we want it to be. And although many people would say that staying grounded in reality is important, surplus reality is a world that isn't apparent. It isn't conscious, but it's there. It's our desires. It's our wants, our needs. And the surplus reality is kind of what makes us human. Our ability to go past what is real. Our ability to imagine past what is in human existence. So I think the empty chair is something that is a small foray into the surplus reality. And if you can get your clients to even start imagining a new world for themselves, then maybe they can do it, because we can't do anything without imagining it first.